Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 25, Coding Challenge Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Curran. What have you been up to this week, Mike?
Yeah, hey, Matt. It's been one of those weeks, I guess. So pretty much my week consisted fully almost of client work, and it's really ramping up. Lots and lots of work from clients. Have to sit in review meetings, have to do some demonstrations, have to, go back and forth through email, through calls, have to actually do some coding sometime in between all that. It's definitely been super busy. And then as of yesterday, I guess, we had a full day of coding, and I'm sure Matt will give you kind of a wrap up of what this is all about. And that's what this podcast episode is about. So stay tuned for that. What about you, Matt?
So basically, my week comprised of a decent amount of client work as well. It seems that I kind of think that client work kind of ramps up in the beginning of the year, and it kind of sets a precedent for the rest of the year. So that's kind of why it's busy, because some of these projects will be well into the summer, I'd say. And then around holiday season, everyone gets busy. So, autumn and, winter, beginning of the winter, people kind of drop off. So this is, since we're so busy, it's a good precedent. So that's good, for sure. But most of my week was actually getting ready for said code challenge, actually putting all that together. And of course, like as Mike said, that's what this week is all about. So I think I'll just dive right in here, because we have quite a lot to say here. This is one of those episodes where we were writing the show notes, and we just kept writing, and we were convinced fully that we wouldn't be able to actually get like a full episode done. And then we were like, oh, there's like 3 pages here. So hopefully this doesn't go way over time, but we will see, because we did do a heck of a lot yesterday. So just to kind of reiterate, in case you only listen to the podcast and you don't follow us on any of the social medias, yesterday on social media, so that would be January 14th, 2019, depending on when you're listening to this, we did a whole bunch of stuff on social media. We were doing a 24-hour code challenge. I went over to Mike's house, and we started putting together this app that we wanted to put together. And what we ended up doing was doing some client work in the beginning, and then we ended up starting the code challenge. So we started it maybe 2 hours late, but we were posting on social media all along. And basically what we were doing was we were putting together an app called No BS News for Reddit, which is basically a non-social media run. That's probably not the right way to say it, but it's like a non-social media version of Reddit news. So the various popular subreddits on Reddit for news, we pull the news from there. We allow people to share the link. They can go through the different subreddits, like I said, the different sorts. They just basically get a nice list of links, just like how Reddit does, except there's no comments, no karma, no sign-in, no BS, as we're referring to it as. And there's like a design note in this episode that'll describe what I mean by no BS. It's kind of the motto of this project that we've been doing. So basically, the different segments I'm going to be going through based on this code challenge is segment number 1, pre-planning and design. Segment number 2, app development. And segment number 3, app deployment. And then, of course, we do still have a web news, but it's a related one to the code challenge, which is our personal opinions on PWAs, or progressive web apps, as this coding challenge, this news app that I just mentioned, is in fact a PWA, or progressive web app. So I'm going to kick things off with the first segment here, pre-planning and design. So as a part of this challenge, we were allowed to plan, design, and research before the challenge began. So to prepare, we did some research on PWAs and their functionality, because we are completely new to them. This is our very first one. We also researched other news apps and what subreddits would be the most useful to people, which ones are most popular, which ones are organized in some way or in certain ways, etc., etc. From a UX perspective, we took a look at what features a Reddit user would need and expect from a Reddit app, minus the social features, of course, because that's sort of the point of our app. From this, we came up with some wireframes to guide our design throughout the process, which we modified on the spot yesterday or on the Monday. I shouldn't say yesterday, because I think you're going to be hearing this a day later, but So during the challenge, we modified some of the designs on the spot to accommodate for an open Reddit post button. If someone is really heated about something and they want to go right to that post and start commenting or whatever, you can do that, but it's not available in our app for the obvious reason. Alongside the alternative share options for PC users, so we were going to have like a share dialogue open up on mobile devices as you will, but what we did on PC is we just have a real quick, URL copied, so you can quickly just paste that into whatever app or social media post you're using when you're on the PC. So we had a discussion regarding the addition of new custom news sets where users could select a bunch of subreddits to pull into a custom or a single custom feed. However, this ended up using up a decent amount of time, which wasn't great, and we didn't end up putting it into the app in its current state because the app is live to an extent right now, and I'm sure we'll get into that in the deployment stage or right at the end here. One other design challenge that we had was that we had like issues trying to make the design sort of pop. I don't really know how to describe this, but it's a very like text heavy app, and so it's weird to just have text on like a white background, and so we ended up going with a dark theme, but it was still a challenge because it's just sort of like there's text everywhere. Where's the pictures? Where's the logo? Where's whatever? But we ended up just saying like, well, if we go and take a look at Reddit and like go through that list, especially if you put it on the dark theme or the night theme or whatever they call it, it'll actually, just be text with like links and then of course your comment buttons and that type of thing. But there's not really much color thrown in there. So we decided, okay, this app fits in with this sort of thing that people would be looking for if they're coming from Reddit. And so we just left it in a dark theme and we're just going to kind of like let the links do the talking, if you will. That kind of ends the first segment here, the pre-planning and design. Unless Mike has any questions, we can jump to that segment number 2.
One thing I want to discuss actually, just on the podcast is our thought process of, is this for Reddit users? Right, like I think we've had a few back and forths, but we're not sure. Like pretty much, I think where we ended is like the audience that I believe will be using this are people that don't really enjoy most of the aspects of Reddit. So they don't like the community upvoting, downvoting to oblivion. The community comments can be kind of toxic, stuff like that. They just kind of, wake up, want to see the news, and that's it. That's what they're going to go for. So they want to go to the news, go to the article, read the article, maybe share it with someone. That was my initial impression of what this is, of who this is for, which also poses like a little bit of a branding issue and a problem where, like, because we have it, no bullshit news for Reddit, right? Like, so we're kind of targeting the Reddit audience, but we're not. But I don't think we can get around that too much because I believe in the Reddit guidelines for their use of the API, we have to use their title in the name if we're going to be using their API. I could be wrong on that. I would love if someone could point that out to me if I am wrong. And also, I'd like to just put it out to the community. What do you think? Like, is this, if you're a Redditor, do you think that this is something you'd value, something like a stripped down version of Reddit, just getting the information? Or if you're a Redditor, is this something that you kind of think, oh, this is unnecessary because all the Reddit apps kind of do everything that I need and I just ignore the stuff that I don't like and it doesn't matter to me? Or yeah, so pretty much just would love to hear everyone's opinion on where this kind of lands for them. And just to reiterate where they can find it, because now it's actually released. It is nobsnews4reddit.com. If you go on it from a phone, an Android phone especially, it'll pop up with a PWA, add to home screen prompt, and it'll be just like a native app for you. So let us know what you think. Check it out, and yeah, definitely tell me what your stance is on. Is this for a Reddit user, or is this for people that completely are separate from Reddit? Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to add, Matt, though.
Well, to add to those comments, just one thing is that we do have fixes and additional updates incoming for the app. The code challenge was basically to try to get an MVP out, which I believe that we did quite effectively, considering it was our first code challenge. We ended up having to actually sleep in between because we stopped around 3 or 4 a.m. and then we ended up finishing it the next morning with after getting a decent sleep. So that's done, or Mike finished the last parts, I should say. the parts that we were having trouble with that we mentioned on our IGTV channel. If you're into that, you can go check out those videos. But it is sort of like Mike and I had a discussion before this, and it is sort of still in like a demo form. Not everything is there yet. There's still some pieces missing. We haven't monetized it, as we've mentioned in the previous episodes, because we literally just put the ad code in and then didn't test it because we were having trouble with a few other things that were blocking us. So we removed those blockers, but the app certainly isn't done yet. I haven't put in a footer yet. It's a whole... there's a few things just here and there, but all the main features are there. You can read the news, open in Reddit, share on most platforms, use it as a PWA. All that stuff is there, but more is definitely coming, and we'll probably end up mentioning that on social media or on the show when we add those features later on, because I do plan on working on it a bit tomorrow, trying to get some of those other features up and running. Also, that's a really good point you brought up, Mike, is like, who is this really for? My kind of thought process was that it was going to be for the Reddit user that doesn't care about the social features, like you said. I know that a lot of my friends, and it's not a massive like sample size, it's not in the thousands by any means, as you kind of should do in market research and that type of thing. But in terms of people who I know who use Reddit, they will often say like, "Oh, I just use it for news." Like, where else would you get the news? Like, where else would you get, what? Like, where else are you going to get that curation? Where else are you going to find those links in that organization, in that curation, as I already mentioned? So I think that it's for maybe those people who just want to, maybe they do have the Reddit app, and maybe they even do care about the social features on other subreddits that aren't newsworthy. But if they want to just check the news, they can have a distraction-free sort of just, I'm going to jump into this no BS news app. I could read my news, and then I can move on with my day. And then at night, I could go on Reddit and mess around in the video game subreddit or the art subreddit or whatever the heck you're into. And there's like, it's kind of two separate experiences, and that's sort of where I envision it. But yeah, absolutely, reach out with what your use case for it is, or what you would like to see in it, or who you think would be using it, because it's something super interesting. Because as a code challenge, we didn't do a super ridiculous amount of market research into this sort of thing. But to move the show along here, segment number 2, app development. So development went rather smoothly, actually, for the most part. We were able to complete almost all of the features that we originally set out to make. We had a few bugs pop up that were dealt with quickly. Namely, we had some responsivity issues with some text overlapping each other. We had some timestamps that were coming in as negative numbers, and Mike did a lot of like sort of the more back-end development type stuff. Like I was the UI developer on this one. So I'm going to actually toss it to Mike to talk a little bit about Vue.js and a couple of the other things that he encountered during the development.
Yeah, like you said, the development went a lot smoother than I thought it was. I think this is probably my 4th or 5th Vue.js project that I've spun up over the past few months. So that process kind of is a little bit more down pat now. The Vue CLI is a great tool, so it kind of put me through it, made it a lot more simple. So it really seemed that Vue.js seemed to actually accelerate the development process in this case. And with its built-in development server, the fact that it live reloads right away, I don't have to screw around setting any of that kind of stuff up like I usually would. That kind of accelerated the process of me actually starting and writing code and writing business logic and writing the pulling Reddit logic and starting to parse the API there. Also, the fact that Vue.js has a really good way of handling event listeners with binding to the actual elements, which is it's pretty convenient. Coming from a person that's coming from jQuery, it's a little bit easier to go into this rather than into a different framework that might handle it a little bit more cumbersome. So I appreciate that value that Vue.js brings. The onboarding process from someone that's coming from a base JavaScript background, I think that's where Vue.js kind of excels over something like React. And then also the fact that Vue.js, also the Vue CLI, it created a PWA template for us right off the bat. So that really also accelerated drastically our PWA implementation, because it created the manifest, it created the logos that were supposed to go into the manifest. So all we had to do was kind of create an icon, and Matt actually did that. It looks pretty good, especially considering I think he only spent 20 or 30 minutes working on it. So good job, Matt, on that one.
At 3 a.m. I might add.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
so.
One of the afterthoughts were like, oh yeah, we need an icon, and then Matt had to mad scramble, and I while I was solving some issues, I heard him, having an exchange of his own.
I yell a lot during development, so you gotta.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as it breaks a certain point, I think like we all started yelling. It was we like you said a couple times. We should have been recording the whole thing because I think it would have been entertaining, just near the end with all the panicking and running around and screaming. But that is truly what a code challenge is. That is for sure. So to move on now, the app functionality implementation went as planned, and it didn't pose much difficulty other than a couple hiccups and glitches that we did fix eventually. Matt already mentioned a little bit, but with the time, so showing how much time has elapsed since each post has been posted was kind of annoying because how Reddit handles UTC time was a little bit different than how date.now handles UTC time in JavaScript. I had to actually times the Reddit UTC time by 1,000 to make it match up, and then doing a simple subtraction and converting to hours calculation was all I had to do after that. But that was kind of like a headbanging situation. But really, other than that, it went pretty smoothly. And then working with the Reddit API was also a really good process. Like, I've worked with quite a few APIs at this point, and I think Reddit is one of my favorites. It's just like you put any Reddit URL, add a .json to it, and it gives you the entire thing in JSON format. I'm a huge fan of JSON. I've been working with JSON since I started in web development, and that made it extremely easy for me to like parse through everything. I made it iterate through all the elements, and then you can add some values to the end of that string to, for instance, give the amount of posts back you want. So we kind of adjusted that a little bit and went forward with our development. So I really recommend, actually, if you're not comfortable with APIs and you're not comfortable with JSON, to go in and take a look at how Reddit handles its API. And maybe go through it a little bit, maybe try parsing it a little bit, like seeing how you can get a single post out of it. What would you do with that post to display it? I think it's a good practice for people that just want to get comfortable with a very basic API, and that will lead you to be more comfortable with the more complicated ones in the future. It's just a suggestion, but definitely worthwhile to take a look at. The other thing is that I think we're pretty much feature complete and as in line with our MVP, the minimum viable product. So like Matt was saying, all the features are there, which is like something I didn't think would happen, to be honest. And they were all working pretty well. I mean, we have to obviously do some fixes, like I was saying, but compared to what I thought was going to happen, and like at some points in the challenge, it was like, oh god, this is going to take hours, and then usually I could fix it pretty quickly. That did not happen near the end, where we ran into like a big wall, but I'll talk about that in a second. So then also, like, for the future of the application, just wanted to mention a couple things that we're going to add, and I don't think it's a lot. But the first thing is we want to make sure that people can create a custom news group. So being able to select from all the curated subreddits that we give you, you should be able to create your own kind of multi-Reddit or combined subreddit that will display what you need. So if you're a person that's living in Europe, but you're interested in all Europe's and North America's and maybe Cuba's, or maybe a South American country, you want to kind of customize your own news subreddit, then go ahead, do that. Like, we'll probably have some sort of UX experience for that, and everything gets saved in local storage, so it'll be there for you next time you load the application. So that's kind of one of the things that we want to implement. I think it's a fairly essential feature, and like Matt was saying, we just didn't get to it. It was kind of like would be nice to have in the code challenge, but with all the other issues that we came across, we just couldn't get that one done. The other thing, and this one might be a little more simple, is just having a light theme, because I know some people prefer the light theme. I'm more of a dark theme guy. I don't know about Matt, but I definitely prefer the darker theme, especially when I'm going to bed and doesn't blind my eyes. So I think that was one of the main reasons we decided to choose doing the dark theme first and then kind of adding the light theme later. So, but that's really it. Those are really the only features that I'm seeing ourselves adding. There will be adjustments to the UI. I'm sure of that, because we kind of went through it quickly. Matt did a great job, in my opinion, with the UI. It looks fairly good. But I'm sure that he's going to go back and do some minor adjustments, maybe change some fonts, maybe change some font sizes, whatever. There's plenty of stuff that could be done. And that brings me to like the motto for this app, and kind of another thing I want to discuss after, which is like, so the motto for this app is every time we came up with a feature and be like, oh, this would be cool, this would be cool. But then we asked ourselves, but is that bullshit? And one of the things that Matt brought up was those images. Like, we could have added images to each post, right? We could have went into the website, grabbed the main image of the website, added that image into the post. But really, is that bullshit? Like, does that image add any value to the person's experience when they want something that has no bullshit in it? And that's kind of the model that we used. And something moving forward, I think, is if this kind of does well and if people react to it in a positive way, I think maybe we can make a line of apps that are in the same brand, quote unquote. So maybe we'll have some other like sports, no bullshit sports or something, like no bullshit hockey, something like that. Something really to carry forward the brand. If people reach out to us and, enjoy the application or have any suggestions, that's kind of what I'm looking for. But that it's definitely a possibility, because I did really like that sanity check every time we wanted a feature. Is this bullshit? Yes, not doing it. So that's about it for app development. I don't know, Matt, do you have any comments on app development that you want to add?
Yeah, for sure. So, just to kind of reiterate, I guess, that motto, the quote unquote is that bullshit feature, I think a lot of it comes down to whether or not it affects your straight up reading experience. So one of the things is, like, since this is like a Reddit companion, if you will, or something like that, app, or a third-party Reddit app of sorts, it, like, we're just linking to the external sources. And one of the things that we had a discussion regarding was that indeed, like, you are going to get the pictures, you are going to get the comments, you are going to get that type of stuff from the news outlet itself, if the news outlet has those. And why are we providing you with a picture, and why are we providing you with anything else that we could have thought of, when you're supposed to be looking at the headline, does that interest me, click on it and read? And I think a lot of people who are into this sort of brand, the no BS brand, is that you guys probably already ignore the cover photos, the comments, the social media share buttons, maybe even from those news sites, and all you want to have is you just want to click on that article and read it. And then, of course, we do have a share feature, because sharing is huge across everything, and that's not really BS. That was actually a bit of a conversation even in of itself, because it was like, well, is it BS that people want to share this? But it's like, well, no, because I think the scenario that we ended up justifying it with was, if there's something major happening in my town, or my neck of the woods in some capacity, my country, my area, whatever, and I see that, and I want to share that with people that are abroad, let's say family that's abroad, or family that have moved away recently or whatever, I'd want to share that, or even just things of interest. You'd want to share that, and that's part of just the reading experience. So, that in and of itself isn't really a BS feature. However, we made it extremely simple. It either pulls up a share dialog or copies the URL. It doesn't have 4 or 5 different share buttons in which it opens up different share dialogues and all that type of stuff, which is functional and great for some stuff, but we want a really quick, streamlined thing, so that's how we're doing that. Also, if you're really into the commenting scene, but only occasionally, we added that open this post on Reddit button. That was, like I said, it was a last-minute ad, but that, from a UX perspective, was, well, if you see something that you think is incorrect, that you're really pissed off about, that you're super happy about, and you want to say something about it, and you're a standard Redditor, then you can quickly click on that, and then boom, you're right in that Reddit app, and you're right on that post or whatever, depending on what platform you're on, computer or app, and you're like right where that post is at, and you could quickly comment, or you could quickly add a karma thing, or give gold, or whatever you do, whatever you Redditors do. I use Reddit here and there, but I'm not super versed in it. So Mike was filling in a lot of the UX things that Redditors do, but that, like, what's good about this motto is what I'm just trying to get at. I know this is a long-winded, but what's good about this motto is that it's one of those things where there's a lot of apps that we've been a part of, a lot of websites we've been a part of, in which a lot, especially customers will constantly bring up the fact like, oh, it'd be cool if we could do this. We have customers that will ask for music, like if they're not versed in like the standards of the web, if you will, the design standards, they'll be like, hey, like, we have like these 8 features or whatever and everything's fine, but could we add music to it? And that's something that we're always like, no, like you can from a technical perspective do it, but no, because it's annoying, because there's a reason why people put their phones on silent. There's a reason why people mute the media slider if you have the volume sliders on Android. Like there's a reason why people want things to be silent, because they're trying to read or research or whatever in a public place, and they don't want that. And it's just annoying because maybe they're listening to music on their computer and it's like, oh, now I got this other thing coming in. So but like what I'm trying to get at is the no BS part is like a really good check. And I think that not necessarily the no BS motto will apply to every project, but I kind of think that in larger projects moving forward, we should have a motto that is at its base, and like that will keep us in check for adding features and adding things. And like if a customer says he wants something minimalist, then that should be the motto, is this minimalist? And we should go forward with telling him, hey, you said in the beginning you wanted this minimalist, like this could be added, but we're starting to add like some bloat here, so maybe we should consider otherwise. I just think it's a really simple idea of having like that motto in the back, but it's a cool way to remember what you set out to do, because there's so many apps out there that grow and then start cutting back features in the development stages, because it's like, oh Jesus, like why do we have 4 different types of share buttons? Cut these out and whatever, right? Before it hits the public eyes. But I just wanted to say that I think that that's an interesting thing that I personally am going to try to incorporate into my future designs and building of websites.
Yeah, totally. And I will too. I've been trying to do that with most applications. I think one of the technical terms for this kind of stuff is feature creep. As soon as you kind of sometimes you even like assign one person in a meeting, be like, you're the feature creep person in this meeting. If we start talking and going on a tangent about features, keep us in check, being like, listen, we're not talking about features, like let's not add anything, because it can get really out of hand when you're trying to do something on a deadline and all of a sudden a client brings up a feature that they really want, but it doesn't match the deadline that they themselves have put to the team. It kind of doesn't make sense to do it. You can kind of call that feature creep, put it into a next development cycle and something like that. But yeah, definitely, I kind of liked the no BS branding of it too, because it really kept us in check, rather than just calling it minimalist or something like that. I think the no BS really like put a proponent on all the features that we talked about. But I'll move on. So the last thing that we had to do was app deployment. So that is segment 3. So we've already had a few episodes where we talked about deployment in a little more detail. We haven't had like a full-on discussion about deployment because I think that at least for myself, I'm not super comfortable with it yet to be able to give too much advice on deployment. But I think it's valuable to talk a little bit about it in context of a 24-hour challenge. So this was by far the most frustrating part of the entire day. And it was only my second time using Docker and deploying to DigitalOcean. So that combination, plus the fact that my interests more lie in the development side rather than deployment side, I'm glad I learned it. Don't get me wrong. I don't mind knowing new things and knowing how the process of deployment works for the future, but I would much rather just sit back, put my hands back and be like, listen, I've made this application. Can someone else deploy it for me? That would be great. That would be an ideal future for me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there at some point, but we'll see. But pretty much, the task was to get it for initially deployed in an Nginx container on a Docker, in a Docker Nginx container on a DigitalOcean droplet. So this in itself is actually a fairly simple deployment compared to what we had to do for HTML the things, which was in a DigitalOcean droplet, we had to do 3 Docker containers, one for the database, one for the backend server, and one for the Nginx to load the website. That was a little more complicated, but again, there wasn't a 24-hour cutoff, so I took my time, made sure everything was correct, did a lot of security measures. It was still frustrating, don't get me wrong, but for this challenge, it was just the Nginx. So get it deployed, just have it as a web app initially. That in itself was kind of challenging. So I think we started deploying at around 12 o'clock at night, so 12 a.m. And I think the first initial part of the deployment, even just getting the application to show up on, www.nobsnewsforreddit.com, that took me like an hour and a half or so, maybe an hour, not that long, but it was frustrating in its own right. But then as soon as that was finished, I was like, well, if we want to deploy it as a PWA, if we want to add all these features like sharing, if we want to have just stuff like that, like being able to use the features that we want to use, we have to have this SSL certified. In itself, that makes sense. I agree with every website being SSL certified, but that was the next logical step. So deploying, put in an SSL certificate, and this is where I just got pummeled. I mean, like it was probably 1:30 at the point where I started SSL work, and I don't know if I was just not thinking clearly, but I pretty much just took what I did in HTML, the things.com, and I kind of just like threw it at this one. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to throw it, click enter and see if it works. And of course it didn't work. And my solution to the whole problem, and this took like hours, was literally just throwing different solutions at it from like Stack Overflow, like copy pasting. There was no thinking involved at 1:30 or 2 a.m. There was just me panicking, but not screaming or yelling, but like panicking and hitting my head off the table and just being overly tired and probably grouchy. But we did, like, we got through a few steps of it. Matt tried to help at some point, and that kind of helped a little bit because it kind of got my head working in a different way, and I started thinking about it more logically. But I just couldn't get myself to wrap my head around the fact that I'll explain it a little bit in more technical terms. So the Nginx container is a Docker container. So that is a Docker container running on a DigitalOcean droplet. So it's running there, and it's very isolated unless you make a volume accessible externally. So what you have to do with like the conf file and the HTML files and stuff like that is you have to link them in a volume and link them to the internal container of the Nginx Docker container. And what I was getting caught up on is when Let's Encrypt, which is a free SSL certificate generator, and I use Certbot because I'm using the Ubuntu installation, which is a Certbot is an automated process of getting this certificate. So when Certbot tries to hit my container, if I don't have that volume mapped to the internal volume of the container, it can't do the test that it needs to do to give me a certificate. And so that was the whole problem. And the other issue was that you can only do 5 like authentications, like 5 tries before it locks you out for an hour. So I think in the first, 3 minutes, I did like 5 tries, locked me out for an entire hour. So I was sitting there researching for that hour, like being frustrated. Then I tried it again, and it locked me out for another hour. And I think in total, we tried it 3 different times. It wasn't exactly an hour each time. It was like half an hour to 40 minutes. It just says an hour, I guess, just to scare you or something like that. But that also slowed it down considerably. But pretty much couldn't get it done. Was frustrated. We just chalked it up like, okay, we have the app deployed. At least we have the app deployed. We're exhausted. Let's end the session right now, and go home, get some sleep, and then maybe tomorrow if we sleep and wake up and we can figure this out. And that's kind of what happened. So it's a suggestion that I give everyone. So pretty much if you're having this problem and you're bashing your head against the keyboard, just step back, like do something else. Either focus on another feature. If you have a deadline, you have to get it done, focus on another feature, or step back and do something else, watch TV, go for dinner, whatever. Like that process just resets your mind and lets you go about it a little bit differently. And every time you go about it a little differently, you can get a better mindset into something that you're having trouble with. That's worked for me. I don't know if that works for everyone else, but that's kind of how I've done troubleshooting, and it's worked out decently well. I can be like super frustrated. I like zero idea of what to do. Take a step back, even if it's like a half-hour step back, come back to it and be like, oh yeah, why didn't I do this? And then it just works. And that's what happened with this. I had to go and look at the fact that like I was saying, the Let's Encrypt was trying to access a folder inside of my Docker container that I did not give it access to. So I just had to map a volume to it, make it the Let's Encrypt, the certbot access that folder, and it worked right away. After that, it's fairly simple. You just set up your nginx conf file, and with SSL certification, where SSL certificates are on the server, and it works just fine. So it probably took me, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes in the morning to solve a problem that we banged our heads at for like 3 hours at night. So there's a lesson in that. Sometimes it's just better to, take a step back and not bang your head against the wall just because you can't solve something. But this is the part of the coding challenge, right? So this is part of what the coding challenge experience is, and it's also an indicator of crunch time. So sometimes in your job, in a school environment, in a job environment, you're going to get to the point where you have to release an application and you have to release it tomorrow, and you're not done 2 or 3 crucial features. And that becomes in itself a coding challenge. That's why these coding challenges are worthwhile to do. That's why these coding challenges are, like, I wouldn't say essential to someone's career, but it's very important to be able to work in that crunch time aspect. And it kind of brought me back to like school. And I even talked to Matt about it. Like, this is weird because, at some points, Matt and I went to the same college, and we were sitting in that same basement that we were sitting in today and studying for an exam. And it was a very similar kind of feeling to that. Maybe not as panicky because it's not an exam, but like it was a very similar feeling. And it's important to be able to do those kinds of things, to be able to, run through it, even if you have to step back a little bit, but come back and try to get it done if you can. So I'm glad we did the coding challenge. I'm glad it's not over. Like, the coding challenge aspect is over. It was a little bit stressful. I don't think that's ever going to change. Like, if we do another coding challenge, I don't expect it to be easy. But one thing that we will probably do in the future is have an initial pre-deployment phase before the coding challenge begins, and do maybe a very basic hello world deployment with SSL already working and stuff like that. Because this is not, like, in my opinion, especially if you only have 1 or 2 people, you shouldn't be having to worry about deploying it to the masses during a 24-hour period, especially because it's a big step, and it's for me, again, it's not my interest. It's not the highest interest level. So I was kind of almost dreading it while doing the actual coding challenge. And I'd be like, oh, I finished this feature. Well, that puts me one step closer to actually having to deploy it. And that put a little bit of a damper on my day. But whereas if we were just working on features, I would have probably been a lot more, productive, maybe a lot, like it would have been more fun in the end. So that may be one of the things that we change for the next one, but definitely stay tuned for that. I'm going to pass it off to Matt now for his comments and for the web news.
Well, I definitely agree with that last part, is because, like, at the end of the day, if we were to do that, like, pre-deployment hello world thing, we're still, like, as a part of the challenge, we would be still deploying the app itself, like, because that is, like, it's not a part of the development process, but it's a part of the release process. And, as a coding challenge, you want to sort of develop it and then release it. In our case, we're excusing ourselves from the design and research, in addition to now part of the deployment. So basically what we would be setting up is just the infrastructure to deploy. When we deploy it to our DigitalOcean or to wherever we're deploying X coding challenge, you will have like you will still have deployment issues. You just don't have to worry about the very basic systems, hopefully, like, in place. You check your SSL, you make sure your name servers are in the right place, whatever your DNS is configured, etc., etc., etc. And then you're just dealing with the app itself and then where the app sits. You're not dealing with, oh, I got to set this whole computer up. It'd be the equivalent, in my opinion, it's the equivalent of us saying, like, we're going to wipe our laptops down to nothing and then have to set up our Windows installation and then also have to set up our other installations. Like, we also have to set up our like all our developer environment stuff, our VS codes, our whatever, and then we have trouble with something when you're installing Windows, and so you're have to deal with that. Like, that's totally I equate it to that, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're installing roles and Docker and configurations on a server, and that's essentially what you're doing, is you're configuring the server for work. So that will be probably excused in any future coding challenges, but the coding challenge was rather fun. Another thing I did want to mention too is that it also was a new experience for us in terms of how we did our social media stuff. So even though it was like the middle of the night, we still did a few videos. It was our first 2 IGTV videos. We had, I think, the most posts and the most stories we've ever had in a single day on social media. We covered it mostly on Instagram and Twitter. However, the IGTV videos are also on Facebook if you're into those. So it was super interesting because we were learning PWA. We were learning kind of more social media based stuff, and I enjoyed the experience. But like, as a first experience, we're gonna tune it and make sure that it is good moving forward. And maybe it will be another PWA in the future sometime. But I think what I'll do is I'll move it right on now to web news. So web news is going to be related. Like I said, it's personal opinions on PWAs or progressive web apps. So I'm going to do a bit of reading here, and then I'm going to read out maybe 3-4 questions, and then Mike and I will, as always, actually have a discussion regarding it. So just a brief disclaimer before we kick things off. We do have very minimal experience with PWAs in both the development and the consumer side of things. I don't really use them. I haven't used many, I should say. I haven't used many in the past, and I've never made any until now. So these points and opinions and everything else are just that. They are our opinions, and our opinions have minimal exposure to PWAs. So if you're, totally on the other side of the fence as whatever opinions we say today, feel free to reach out to us because we're learning, so that's part of our learning. So moving on here. Progressive web apps fall into a strange segment of the market because they're not quite native apps and not quite websites, at least under the hood kind of thing. So like a regular user may not really notice that they're on an app or on a website, but for a guy, especially for us who's developing it, like we notice the difference. Now, we've entered into a time where the internet is relied upon to power a lot of things, and therefore an internet browser of some kind is almost always open on people's computers or on people's phones. So on the PC, it's rare that people use traditional quote-unquote apps like Facebook, for example. They, in general, will more than likely be using the browser, and they'll be on Facebook.com, which serves virtually the same purpose as the app, but they will be on that browser instead, on that website. So PWA seem to sort of bridge the gap, if you will, between the two versus that website versus that app. And basically what it does is it adds accessible offline features to web developers that are creating websites or web apps that will eventually need a mobile app of some sort. So you could look at it as whether let's say you're making the next Facebook, or let's say you're just making Facebook.com, you want an app, and let's say for whatever reason you want it to be a native app, but you want an app today and you don't want to wait the 3 months it takes to develop that mobile app. Well, you could do a progressive web app temporarily and do that, or you could just make a progressive web app and that might be your app experience moving forward. So with that being said, there seems to be a bit of a stigma against non-native software. So things like web views and other app types are readily available. We've mentioned Apache Cordova several times now, and several times throughout the other episodes. But the big apps always seem to go with the native route, even if it means that they have to make 2 entirely separate apps. So that'd be like iOS and Android, for example. Or maybe they have to deal with porting between the two, so they develop in some sort of common language, and then they try to port between the two, so they're porting it into either a native scenario of some sort where it works just like a regular app, so it's not like a web view. If you're a developer in this space at all, you kind of know the stigmas and the limitations and the pros and cons of each of these all these different like ways to do it. So this kind of leads to our questions, and I'll list these off now and then we'll have a discussion. So where do we feel PWAs will fit in? Will they take off? Will they displace native apps? And are they here to stay? So I'll kind of toss it off to Mike there, since I've been gabbing on for a bit, to grab his opinions on this matter.
Yeah, Matt. So do I think they'll take off? I think they're in a pretty good state right now. I don't know if they're going to explode and be the number one thing on your phone at any point in time, but I think realistically, I believe there will be people that have 3-4 progressive web apps on their phone at any given time within the next couple of years. I like them in a sense because for something simple like what we're doing, like the no BS news for Reddit, it just makes a lot more sense to have it as a progressive web app, especially to start. Instead of having to put in your time and dev effort into, you know, packaging it into an app store, putting it on the app store, waiting for that approval process and stuff like that, being able to put it out there and let people use it right away and get that feedback, get that error, like the you know, get all the bugs out and stuff like that, see what people think, and then slowly, you know, put it onto the app store if that's what you want to do. But even for people that don't want to put it on the app store, like I think one of our goals is to do that, put it on both on the iOS app store and the Android app store for sure. But I think we'll still leave it as a PWA as well for people that have that, don't want to download anything extra through the app store, don't want to have that, you know, auto updating feature for another thing, don't want to give any more permissions from the app store, just don't want to have that hassle. Just being able to go to a link, add to home screen is a very, very streamlined and simple process compared to having to, you know, find it on the Play Store, click install, wait for it to install, and then go and actually experience the application after that. You could be experiencing the application before you even click add to home screen with the PWA, which to me makes a lot more sense because it's almost like sometimes it's almost like a demo, right? Because you check it out on the web, you're like, oh, I like this. I'd go back to this every once in a while. Usually you would just favorite that, but then you'd have to go in and go into your favorites, open it up. Now you can add it to your app store, add it to your home screen, and it just acts like a regular application for you. Like you can't tell the difference between it and a regular application in most cases. On Android, in fact, it almost has all the same functionality as a native application. Now, it is using a web view technically. So the performance, like if it's something, it's a very interactive application, very transition heavy, lots of animations. I could see there being arguments against using something like this because web views are known to be a little bit sluggish in those kinds of scenarios. Native is always known to be, you know, more to the metal. Even something like Flutter might make more sense for something like that to be more to the metal coding. But for something small, for a simple, like, you know, small business application, a simple, you know, e-store, like online store that a website wants to have, I think that this makes perfect sense for that. You're on Android, you're able to give them push notifications, like your customers' push notifications. You're able to, you know, use the camera. You're able to update, like you're able to do everything that a regular application is able to do without having a person have to go to the App Store, download the application, and then look at your application. You're allowing them to actually demo it before you do that. That's, I think, a big advantage of a PWA. Rather than opposed to like a native app where someone has to actually install it and go through that process before they even get to try it. That's kind of where I land on it. I think they're here to stay. The other thing is that iOS is still catching up to Android's functionality. There's a couple notable things like no push notification support on iOS, which is kind of a drag. But really, and also the other big thing on iOS actually, and something that we just learned, they don't pop up saying add to home screen like they do on Android. So on Android, the experience is very smooth. Like you use the application for a little while and all of a sudden you get a little pop-up saying add to home screen. That's how you know it's a PWA. On iOS, on the other hand, you can't really know it's a PWA. The thing that I'm thinking of implementing, and I just thought of this recently because like right before this podcast, we had a discussion about iOS, and we haven't even had a chance to talk with Matt about it. But I think what we should do is actually detect if someone's using it on iOS and pop up a toast saying, hey, check it out. You can add this to your home screen as almost a native application or as a PWA or something. Some sort of message to the user that they can do that because it does not provide one natively for them. I don't know what you think about that, Matt.
That makes sense. Like something that would say, like, you know, go to your settings and add to home screen to check us out, or make sure to bookmark us, or like an equivalent to make sure you bookmark this page, you know, but make it worded such that it's a PWA, so you want to hit the add to home screen button rather than just bookmark. I think that's a cool idea. Or we could even like suggest both, really, because like both of the, like it's equally as beneficial. If somebody prefers the bookmark method, I mean, go for it.
Yep.
One thing I will say, I don't know if you were done your thoughts there, Mike, but one thing I will say regarding PWAs is that they're interesting because normally, and like ours is rather simple, so whether this development process varies a lot based on complexity, I'm not really sure. I'm sure it does. Not really sure, and then I'm sure it does. But anyway, well, I assume it does, I should say. But anyway, I'm surprised that I'm surprised at how little like the service workers took to deal with. Like we basically just said, okay, we're gonna make this, and basically just went on Git whatever, and we just like banged out an app, which we essentially did with the same process that we've always done for websites. Different branches, whatever, blah blah blah. We have our own way of doing things. We just banged out an app, like a web app / website, and then the service worker was second. Like when we did our last IGTV video last night, it was like the app or the app / the website was already done, but there was absolutely no PWA component in there that we had done there. Like the service worker wasn't really doing anything, nothing. But today I tested it out, and I'm able to add it to the home screen, and sure, only the UI, like the header and footer on my phone, appear when it's in airplane mode, because obviously all the links come from Reddit or whatever. But we could add complexity to that and save state, where we could save those headlines. I think we mentioned that in another podcast where we were kind of planning on doing that, but there's a question of what's the use of that. But the whole point is that look how flexible this experience is. Here's a website that we've made, and you can add, offline functionality, essentially. Obviously, there's limitations to everything, but you can add offline functionality at will to various parts. Right now we just have it so the app can open up. Like I said, it's basically in a demo form right now. The whole app is. But it's a weird development thing. And weird is in a good way, because if we were keen on making, we still have some improvements to do to the HTML, all the things website. A lot of the backend stuff actually isn't even styled. It's just in default forms and stuff like that. So once we polish things up, get a little bit more design going and stuff like that on there, whenever we get time to do that, if we want an HTML, all the things app, and the service workers / PWAs are available, I think it's a no-brainer. That would be, from what I'm thinking right now, would be one of the paths we would absolutely consider, at the very least, if not just go ahead and do. Because there's no point, we could Cordova it as well. That's a, sort of a similar outcome, but it's different process, similar outcome. But this seems like we could just, and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, we can just tack on a PWA, or to tack on the PWA title, essentially, by adding in service workers and that type of thing, and adding some functionality. And as we said before too, once this thing is actually done, once this thing is out of demo essentially, and everything, all the features are in, all the parts are in, at least for a real good version 1, we want to put this thing on the App Store. And from what we've seen, there are roads to the various app stores. I believe there's a road to the Google Play Store, road to the App Store. I think we're going to be focusing on the Google Play Store for now, at least. But there's a road to that from this. And I think we've mentioned it in this episode, but that's super versatile. And that speaks to, I don't know, Mike's right. I don't know whether they'll take off. It's really hard to tell what will take off, what won't. And I've only heard PWA talked about a little bit, really. It's one of those things where everyone was talking about it and going crazy for it because it was new, but then it just sort of disappeared because that's what things do. They kind of get oh, look at what we can do on the web now. Oh, awesome. Okay, I'm going to go use WordPress. It's one of those things. So, this is super interesting because, it's possible, and I haven't tested this at all, like I said, but it's possible that these blogs that are on WordPress that have any sort of following at all could easily get up and running with an app if you just hire a dev for a few hours work, maybe here or there. Again, I don't have my research on that, but from my small exposure to this, those things would have to happen for it to take off. And it could take off, but I'm not 100% on that. I'm not 100% on any of this. These are all opinions, but I would say that it's still sort of niche for sure, and I kind of expect it to remain being niche. However, if a big boy in the space, whoever they are, whether it be some sort of company that normally just has a web app and they decide to go full progressive web app, and a few other companies follow suit and realize, hey, this is cheaper to develop. We got a web app made, and we didn't have to, also make a native app that plugs into an API that we made and all this, and we could just have a service worker, making sure that the user's profile or whatever it is remains offline and then syncs when it needs to. If these big companies see savings and savings in the several thousands or more, and they only have one dev team, keeping things up and running keeping that website up and running, and then a couple guys that know how to do the service worker, that is where I think it would take off. that is where I also see it would be displacing native apps. Is if we get someone in there, like right now Twitter, for example, does have a PWA. That was the one that we were messing around with, and like they have a PWA, but they also like still want you to download and use that app. Like they do have a native app, and the native app does do different things. I believe Mike uses the PWA full time. I use the app, but it's one of those things where if they were both identical and one had, let's say, less battery usage, or if you know, I don't have to have something else essentially installed, and because sometimes you'll go to like let's say like an app has 100 features, and the web app, because it's the web version, has like an extra 10 features on top of that, 110 features. It's just one of those things where, you know, if you can bring the full native experience without having to port it into an actual app, you just have the full experience of your web app in, and it's just as easy as installing an app. Like I'm there, like I'll do that. That's fine. We haven't messed around with notifications. I'm not sure what the limitations are on those, but I would say that because some big boys are still doing it, like Twitter is doing it, but in part because they're not exactly abandoning their regular app. But if, you know, some of these larger companies come in and they like seem to maintain or like they seem to like really push this train ahead, I think they could displace some larger apps. And one other small thing is that a lot of end users, they don't really know what they're downloading when they download it. They know what the app is, but they don't know all this stuff that we're talking about. They don't know what a PWA is. They don't know what a website versus a web app is. They don't understand any of that. They just go like, oh, I went to the website and used this. Like Facebook's essentially a web app, right? It's not a website where you just go and read the news. You can do that on there, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff, you know, managing albums and photo albums and all kinds of stuff. And so it's one of those things where if it could be taking off in the background without people, like consumers, really realizing it. And one example that I have of being actually kind of a part of that was I made a Cordova app, so essentially like a WebView app for an old website called Berryflow. And that website, or that web app, was handed out. Like I had a test version that people could just install when I was still in the development procedure. And I kind of handed them it, and I said, here you go. Like, you know, I think there were 3 parts to the app, and I said, I only have the first one running, which was the news feed. So like, you know, go ahead, mess around with it, whatever. I'm working on the podcast thing, and I'll give you test versions as I make them. And the one guy like had no idea, because he was total consumer on the whole thing. Like he wasn't a developer, is what I mean. He was on the consumer side of the things. And the one guy told him, he's like, yeah, that's a WebView, man. And he had no idea. So it's like, you know, there's that native app stigma where it's like you want to be a native app, but at the same time, if it performs well, works well, does the job, companies and consumers alike, I don't think are going to really care. And the stigma is going to be in the niche community of developers. And again, if Reddit or someone, and I don't know what they make their app on, but if Reddit or someone just decided to make their native app on thing, they just decide to replace it with a PWA, I'm sure even the people who have that stigma and they want the native apps on, you know, per platform, I'm sure that those guys would still download that PWA from, you know, the Google Play Store and still use that PWA Reddit app. So it's weird because we have an insider view. I think that's sort of where market research falls. I don't know if you have any more comments on this, Mike, but like I feel like we have the blinders on.
Yeah, I agree. I think one big thing that's going to stop PWAs from being like a major driving force in the industry is the fact that you can't really monetize them too much. Like your options for monetization are, you know, memberships inside of the application, like being able to log into a members area or something like that, or ads, right? Like you can't sell the PWA. There's no way to monetize it in that way. You can't sell like a premium version of the PWA inside of it, like, you know, offer a free version, sell a premium version. I see them used in tandem. I see a future where people will be able to stumble across an application through a website and be like, oh, I can add this to my home screen, and then they can use it on their phone. But then to get like the premium version, maybe they'll make it so that you'll have to go and download it from the App Store and then buy it. You know what I mean? I see that could definitely be a thing because just the demo aspect, like I said initially, like being able to try it out on the web without having to install it, I think is a big thing for people. A big barrier to entry is the install process for a lot of people. Like, they don't want to go through it again. I know my parents are a good example of that. Like, they just don't want to go to the App Store and have to install it, because usually, like, they haven't done anything on the App Store in a while, so they have to put in their password and they have to install it. Like, that whole process for regular consumers, as crazy as it is, that process is a stop in a barrier to entry. Like, they're not going to do that unless there's an absolute must that they have to download this application. Where if it's like this is a nice application, like this is a nice website, I would probably use this on my, on a daily basis or on a weekly basis if I could, but I'm not going to go and download it from the App Store because I'm lazy and I just don't want to deal with that. The value in it I see is breaking that barrier. For large organizations. And I think Twitter realized that. That's why Twitter did this. Because just regular people that go on Twitter on their phone all the time, all of a sudden they pop up, add to home screen, bam, you have them as like a daily user, right? Just from being able to click one button instead of having to go to the Play Store, put in your password, download application. That's really that. I think that's my insight to this. I don't, again, like Matt said with a disclaimer at the very start, we don't have that much experience with PWAs. The only thing I can say is that the service worker is not very difficult to set up initially. It's not that it's like to make it work in the sense that it's a full offline mode experience where it caches all of your server calls. That's a different step. It's a different step in difficulty level. But to actually just make it a PWA, all you have to do is like get a generic service worker that can be created for you, even by a thing called like Vue CLI or a website called pwabuilder.com. That can help you with it too, and also have a manifest file where you show what your theme colors are, what your name of the application is going to be on the home screen, and your icons and stuff like that. That's all you really need. Barrier to make these applications, very, very low. It's super easy to make them. That's a huge thing I think people are not taking advantage of, and I think you're absolutely right in the sense that HTML, the things will eventually become a PWA. I'll have to look into it a little bit more because I do want to launch with the offline mode functionality completely done when we do a PWA for it, because I don't think there's any value in no, there probably is still value in making it without having that offline mode, because not a lot of people will think to even use it offline, be like, why would they go there to use it offline? But anyway, I still kind of want to delve more into the service worker side of it, because service workers do seem interesting to me. They allow for concurrency as well, which I kind of want to do, like parallelism, running on multiple cores, which I definitely want to get more involved into. I did take a couple of courses in university on parallelism, and it is very, like, for me, it's fairly complicated. It wasn't like an easy concept to grasp, but the stuff that I did grasp did really interest me. So I want to get into that at some point again. But really, that's all I think I have to add. I just want to say thank you to everyone that stayed tuned to our whole last debacle, not debacle, but fun time that we had last night for the coding challenge. So thanks for everyone for doing that. Thanks for everyone for commenting on social media and talking to us. And you can obviously continue to do that. Reach out to us. We can answer any of your questions and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good just to close things off. That's a really good point, Mike, that you had, was that it, like, for people, especially people who are occasional users or people who just want to get their news or whatever, like from Twitter, I'm using that as the base example. Like, they don't want to have to like back out, go open this Play Store app. Like, to them, it's like they have to, like, for us, it's, it's just like a curiosity, like, oh, I got to go download an app, and you just do it. But for them, and like some of the older crowd or some of the people who are more utilitarian or minimalist, they might be like, oh, Jesus, I got to back out, go to a different app now. Go back, open this, open that. It's a whole thing. This is like, they're on this thing. They're like, hey, I like this website. Clearly they like it the way it is. And so they just add to home screen and that's it. And whether they upgrade to the app down the road for more functionality or for a different look or whatever it offers, Twitter in this case still has them locked in. And realistically, like, minus the messaging, I think, which I've only used it a couple of times, minus the messaging or how the messaging is laid out, I just prefer it on the app. Like, if it was all the same, like I think I would maybe just use the PWA app. And if it had a huge battery benefit, which I don't know if it does, but if it had a huge battery benefit, I would definitely, jump into the PWA version and just use it. Because like Twitter is a utilitarian thing. You read the news, post on there. Like what else am I doing on there? It's not something that really, really forces me to do things with a certain preference. Like it's not like I have a passion for Twitter is what I'm trying to get at, right? It's not like I some people really want to use the CLI on computers and that's their setup. And they don't want anything to force them out of the CLI to use a UI of some sort. In this case, it's Twitter, man. Like I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there is someone out there, but I don't know of anyone that is like passionate about Twitter. It is, it's a good app, good PWA, and it's a good service, but it's still a utilitarian. It's still a tool, more so than, oh, look at my hammer. It's like painted something nice. You know what I mean? It's not like no one makes their hammer or their tools is what I'm trying to get at look nice. It's like this thing does its job well, so I can get this job done, whatever it is. So anyway, so it'll be interesting to see in the next couple of years. PWA just started hearing about it maybe 6 months ago. Myself, like en masse, like started hearing about it in podcasts and stuff. So we'll see what road it takes, and we'll obviously be talking about that as we experiment with those with PWAs and possible PWAs in future code challenges. But I think I'm going to conclude here at this point because we've been gabbing on for quite a bit, and I am still rather tired from yesterday, and I'm sure Mike is too. So thanks for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can follow us on all the socials via @HTML All the Things, and that's on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us at HTML Everything on Twitter. We're also on Medium. Check out our new CSS grid guide on there. We're also on GitHub, and we have, I think, a repo or two in there as well, so you can follow the organization or whatever they call it in GitHub and use it up. Also, small note, private repos are now free within certain parameters on GitHub as of Microsoft's acquiring them. So check that feature out if you've been using like another service or avoiding Bitbucket or avoiding GitHub at all, or maybe you've been using Bitbucket just for your private stuff and then GitHub for your public stuff. You can use free private repos on GitHub now as well, so you can give that a go if you want to. I mean, Bitbucket's a perfectly fine service, and so is your own Git setup, but just an FYI for all those of you guys that may be interested. We're also on Patreon, as I said before, patreon.com/HTML all the things. Check out the tiers there and give it a go. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you are listening to this on, and we are signing off.